Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time it's our next part of how to become a better book collector. This particular episode is going to be focusing on vintage Penguin books, predominantly the main series, numbers 1 to 3000 if that's what you fancy collecting, but we'll also look at other Penguin series, tips on identifying reprints, condition, rarities, that sort of thing. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's get to it. So it was about 40 years ago when I was in school that I remember coming across my first ever sort of vintage Penguin book, and it was this one here, Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham. Now, around the same time, the BBC had done an adaptation of it on TV, and with John Deteen in the starring role, and I thought that was absolutely fantastic. Still the best adaptation I think that's ever been done. And I was amazed to find that my school library had this one. They had the 3 Quatermass books by Penguin. They had a few others by John Wyndham, and I pulled them all together and I was reading them voraciously and absolutely loving them. But one thing I noticed was that at the bottom of each book's spine there was a little number. And that's because all these books were published pre-1970, before ISBNs came in, and Penguin used their own numerical system. And I thought, well, that's amazing. So anyway, I made it my sort of mission to get all the John Wyndhams because I was enjoying them so much. So I would regularly haunt second-hand bookshops. Even when I was at school, I was all over them, and there was a lot more of them around. And I started to notice other earlier Penguin, and Pan books for that matter, but lots of earlier Penguins, which were numbered, and real early numbers, like, under 100 or so. And I started picking them up because they were plentiful and they were cheap, and they were some fantastic authors, people who actually wanted to read. And before I know it, I had a numerical series of Penguin books starting to form, and since then I've never really looked back. And right now, well, I share my house with I think about 7,000 Penguins, so I've pretty much gone down that rabbit hole in a very big way. So first off, why to collect Penguin books? Well, I think predominantly they've got one of the best lists of authors that you're ever going to find. So for starters, you're going to have an absolutely fantastic library. The other thing that really attracts me is that even during the war, they strove to produce books of a consistent quality. Now, obviously, during those wartime years, paper quality suffered and paper was rationed, so they could only do the best that they could. But the early volumes, the pre-war ones in particular, are absolutely beautiful. A lot of them came with dust wrappers as well. And then as soon as the war was over, they heightened the level of production across all their series, and they are absolutely fantastic. Beautiful, beautiful books to collect, and you will end up with a superb library of books that you'll actually want to read. Other reasons people collect Penguin books is their vast history, learning about how the Penguin books were formed, and Alan Lane, their founder, and their history, and all the other prominent characters and editors in charge of different series is a fascinating subject in itself, particularly if you like sort of publishing history. Apart from that, within the list, you've got very, very collectible books. This one here, for example, is a very scarce wartime crime title. You may only see a handful of copies of this particular one turn up in the course of a year, but they are all out there with a bit of perseverance. Certainly, it's taken me decades to complete my run, but that's not to say, you might get lucky and just come across one of these at a boot sale. So the collectability and the thought that this is just a cheap paperback, that a lot of regular booksellers, they don't even rate paperbacks at all. You could come across this one at the next boot sale or church sale and be quids in. So it's another reason why it's great fun to collect these particular paperbacks. The sheer amount of Penguin books published, even pre-1970, which is my main focus, numbers in the thousands. So I think it's important to break Penguin's vast output down into much smaller chunks. In the future, I will release dedicated standalone episodes on Puffin books, Pelican books, King Penguins, books for the forces, Penguin classics, and many, many more. So I think at this point it's worth considering what part of the main series you're going to collect. Now, some people do the first 100 books, which is a challenge in itself. Others the first 500, which is, pretty darn tough. The first 1,000, though, I think is perhaps the most popular option because you get the first 21 years or so of Penguin's existence, and people do try and strive to get the first 1,000 books, and they are a fantastic list within that. Other people like me are trying to get the first 3,000 books, which peter out at around 1969, 1970, when ISBNs got introduced, and that's an incredible job to do. I've still not finished it myself, and I've been collecting for decades now. As it stands right now, as I film this video, I'm about 80 odd books short of having the first 3,000 vintage penguins. So there you go. But at the same time, what a variety of stuff. So some people like to collect by authors. They might like to get all the Agatha Christie's, or all the John Dickson Carr, or all the George Orwell books, or Graham Greene. I mean, Penguin published them all. And as I said, you will have an absolutely stunning list and library in your collection if you decide to go down this particular route and become a collector. Other people collect by genre. So this is Penguin 100 here, and it's a Cerise travel one, so vintage travel. As we've mentioned, people love the green crime books, very, very popular. I do know collectors, many in fact, who just collect the green crime ones, and they are the most collectible genre within the Penguin sort of collecting sphere, as it were. I even know some people who collect vintage crossword puzzle books. So in the early days of Penguin's existence, they published all sorts of things, including crossword puzzles, for at least 20 odd years. In fact, they carried on doing them periodically right up into the 80s, crossword books. So there are specialists within the Penguin list, and people just collect what they fancy. And that's something that I do urge you to have a little think about before you just dive in and buy willy-nilly. However, the books are plentiful, and if you're patient, you can track them all down over time. But do have a think about what you might be trying to focus in on when you start collecting these. Now, the early books were color-coded by genre and type, very similar to the Albatross books, which were published in Europe a couple of years before Penguin. Now, the popular story is that Alan Lane was sat at Exeter St David's railway station. He just visited Agatha Christie, and he miraculously came up with the idea, after not finding anything on the platform to buy for him to read on the journey home, of coming up with the sixpenny paperback. Now, that's not strictly true. Alan Lane had travelled Europe extensively in the years prior to 1935, when Penguin were formed, and he would have seen those Albatross books out and about. He must have, being in the book world. And if he'd had just visited Agatha Christie, who herself had over a dozen books published in the Albatross Continental Library, he would have seen Agatha Christie's probably copies and thought, right, that's it, I am definitely going to be making a sixpenny paperback series for the UK market. It's a popular myth. I have covered the Albatross books in detail in a couple of videos on the channel, and I do suggest researching that, but they are, I feel, the origin of the colour coding of the Penguin books. And obviously, the Albatross books came to a sudden and swift death as soon as the outbreak of the Second World War happened. The Nazi Party in Germany put a stop to that. But Alan Lane took the idea and ran with it and made them what is today still one of the most popular and successful publishers in publishing history. Now, within the main series, the books were colour-coded by genre, so you could almost instantly see at a glance in a bookshop what sort of book you were going to be getting. They were also clearly marked on the front there, but the most iconic is the orange for Penguin's fiction list, which pretty much everyone knows, alongside the very, very famous green Penguin crime. Instantly recognisable. But then you had some others, so you had like red coloured books. These were for plays. These are a couple by Bernard Shaw there, so they're plays. Miscellaneous titles, so things like billiards and snooker for amateur players, the crossword and the puzzle books, or these two, for example. These were like miscellaneous titles, and they came with the yellow covers. Then travel and adventure, those were in cerise ones. Very, very distinctive. There are collectors who just collect these cerise ones. They're really, really good fun. Then you've got the rather sombre grey ones. These are for world affairs. There was a handful of books published post Second World War which dealt with those sorts of subjects. The familiar blue, which was used on biography titles. We've got the lilac, and that was for sort of essays, letters, that sort of thing. And then finally, you've got the brown books, which were for history titles. So that's the colours of the main series Penguin books. Now, one thing to consider is, do you want Penguin first printings, or would you be happy with a reprint? So I thought it would be a good opportunity to show you a first Penguin edition. So this is number 151, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. This one would have originally come in a dust wrapper, but what we're looking at here, what's important here, is that this page is the printing history. So we've got sort of the original publication, all the different impressions there, right the way down to that one at the bottom there where it says published in Penguin Books, July 1938. And that in effect is the first Penguin edition. So that's what most collectors collect. Now here's a later copy. This one actually is in a dust wrapper. But it advertises the latest Penguins of that period, so that's the first clue. But you don't even need to look at that because A, the logo is a little bit different, but we've got the printing page again, so you give the massive history. We just saw it was published first in Penguin in July 38, then this is the second, this is the third impression from July 1939. Now something like The Invisible Man was kept in print by Penguin for decades and decades. I have got a later one, which is a wartime one, and the print run on this probably would have been pretty small considering when it was actually published. You can see the paper is very, very thin because it was printed under wartime standards, and this is something to look out for if you're looking for first editions from this period. They've got adverts in now as well, period adverts. There's some for Cadbury's chocolate, but this one here, it's an abbreviated form, but it's still the same. It lists the first Penguin printing of July 38. This one now, 7th impression from June 1943, right at the heart of the Second World War. So, gives you a little example. You can always go for later editions. They'll definitely be cheaper, but at the same time, it's a bit more of a challenge, but it's very, very satisfying if you try and track down those first editions. So we'll use this copy of The Invisible Man for me to show you some of the more common faults and things that you might find when you're picking up old Penguins. So this book is, you could sort of say, typical from the period. It's got someone's name written on the front. There's some tape that's been put onto the bottom of the spine. I mean, in all honesty, that may even come off. It's so old now, but it might do. The cover is splitting. You can see the top of the cover is literally detached. It's like torn there. Once again, a very, very common sort of fault with these ones. Sometimes you see writing inside. That's very, very common. Often on the first page or two, you might see a bookseller's pencil mark. Sometimes not always in pen. Sometimes you find like a previous owner's name inside. But these are all things that you must look out for and be aware of. With some of the books, they can have faded spines because the spines have been caught in the sun. Another thing to look out for, particularly the reds and the oranges, they are susceptible to sunning. So that's all the things I would think, yeah, little points to look out for. With dust wrappers, it's almost exactly the same, really. So if we pull The Invisible Man with the dust wrapper here, this dust wrapper isn't actually too bad, but you can get an idea of what might go wrong. So you can see, first of all, that this spine is slightly darkened. Now, you've got to remember when these books were published in the 1930s, many people still had coal fires. So if they had their bookcase in their living room, for example, by the fire, soot, and also most people were smoking as well, that would stain the edges of the books. And this one here suffers a little bit from that. You can see it's much darker than the actual front of the book because this edge here has been exposed. You'll see numerous creases along the edges there. There's little tears, there's rubbings. These are little cuts. These are all the sorts of things to expect with an old dust wrapper. And the better the condition, the more valuable potentially the book, because top condition dust wrappers just aren't really around like that. They're pretty scarce. Personally speaking, I'm not mad about keeping all my books in dust wrappers. I just want a copy of the book. But if I'm lucky enough to get a book with a dust wrapper, it usually means that the book underneath, such as this one, is in absolutely exceptional condition for its age. And this is exactly the sort of book that I would pull off the shelf as my reading copy. I'm reading a beautiful, basically 80-year-old paperback in beautiful condition. And it's, because it's Penguin, it's beautifully set. It's just a joy to read this sort of a book in this vintage format. I absolutely love it. So the next thing to think about is, have you considered how much actual space the book library might start to take up? Now, 100 books in itself isn't too bad. That's probably one of these shelves, perhaps a little bit more. But multiply that by 10 if you're aiming for the first 1,000. and suddenly you've got an entire bookcase. 3,000, you got real problems there, and there's not many people with over 3,000 paperbacks in their collection. Since I've been collecting, particularly in the last sort of 10-15 years, I've never had the space to get my entire Penguin collection actually out. It's a dream that when we next move house, I'll have my dedicated Penguin book library, and I'm really looking forward to that. But until then, half my Penguin book collection is actually stored in boxes. I can't get it out and enjoy it, which is a real shame. So I would say if you want access to the books and enjoy the library as best you can, think about how much space is going to be taken up, and maybe don't, overshoot what you've got actually space for, because boy, oh boy, do they take up a lot of space. So now a word on rarities and value. So as a general rule, books in the Penguin main series from numbers 500 upwards can be had for a few pounds. You go into any sort of second-hand bookshop, even charity shops, they've usually got a few, maybe just £1 each, and there'll be hundreds of them there for you to choose from. So from that point of view, you can get a library very, very cheaply, especially when you consider that your average paperback these days is £8 or £9.99. You can get a few vintage, beautiful Penguin books with real, thought gone into its design for the same sort of money. So I do like that aspect about collecting as well. However, it's the first 500 books within the Penguin main series. Those are the ones which, unfortunately, are the more collectible ones, particularly in first edition. So take number 1, for example, Ariel. It's not that expensive a book. It's not massively in demand. An unwrappered copy might be £15 to £20. One in its original dust wrapper in the first print, maybe £35 for a really, really nice copy. However, some of the crime ones, early crime ones, wartime crime books are expensive as well. Not all of them, but some of them are. There's a couple of orange ones which are expensive as well. All of these real rarities I've highlighted in separate videos on the channel, so you can have a little look around in the dedicated Vintage Penguin playlist, so you can see which ones you should be looking out for. But the good thing is they're so plentiful, and because most mainstream second-hand book dealers don't really rate paperbacks, you can find these for dirt cheap, and I've certainly found my share of real valuable Penguin books for literally 10-20p, because I know what I was looking for. So there are certainly bargains to be had. Once dust wrappers were dropped, the books started to suffer due to paper rationing and the approaching Second World War. Now, they steadily got worse until about 1945. Now, it's this wartime period which contains the most sought-after books of all, and sadly also the most expensive. Wartime crime titles in particular, with their fragile covers and relatively small print runs, sometimes only 50,000, are often well read, and they're well thumbed copies as well, and they command the highest prices, particularly if they're in very nice condition. But it's not just the crime books. So there are a couple of very expensive fiction titles, and that's this one here, which is Biggles Flies Again, which is obviously, apart from Penguin collectors, there's people who collect the works of W.E. Johns and Biggles books. This is a very, very scarce wartime orange title. And this one here, which just seems particularly scarce, and it's on most people's wants lists. Full House. You can see my copy is not very good at all, but it's the only one I've got, so I'm happy just to have a copy. But these are some examples of that very scarce 1943, 1944 and the start of 1945 period, amongst the very scarcest Penguin books of all. As with all these things, knowledge is power, and the more informed you are, the better you'll be as a collector. Being able to spot a potential bargain or a particular edition will pay dividends down the road. So do your research, become an expert, and you will become a better collector. Now, there are a few resources, both online and in print, that I would very much recommend. The first one being this one, which is Q21. This is published by Penguin themselves in 1956 for their 21st anniversary. It's called The Penguin Story, and it's absolutely brilliant. Now, I've got maybe 6 copies of this book because it's my favourite one, but I thought I'd show you my original one. This is the one that I picked up when I started collecting Penguin books back in the 80s. And it's great for starters because it's got a list of all the books published up to that time, and I would use it. You can see my original, as I was getting them, I was crossing them out, as you can see. So it's fantastic for that. I mean, obviously it doesn't list like anomalies and books that were re-released and republished or withdrawn. There's no minutia like that, but it is a really good starting point as a guide to all the various series. Apart from that, it gives you the official version of the Penguin story right from its early years, and the book itself is a design masterpiece. It is just incredible, and it tells the story of how the books came from hardback into paperback, and yeah, from reprint to originals, and the production process as well. It's illustrated throughout. It is just magic, absolutely magic, this, and it's one of my all-time favorite Penguin titles. It's just lovely. I really, really enjoy this. So I would say, if you're thinking of collecting Penguin books, this is your starting point. We've also got the Penguin First Editions website. Virtually all Penguin books are listed from all series with a scan of the covers and other key points. They have a sidebar with some very specialist Penguin dealers, indispensable, and a site that I refer to often. The Penguin Collectors Society, established in the early 1970s, they publish twice yearly magazines filled with articles by members, plus an annual special publication. They have a large archive of books on different aspects of Penguin history. I would advise going to their website and looking through what publications are still in print, and I definitely advise joining the society. They also hold an annual AGM, which is unmissable. My series of videos here on YouTube looking at all aspects of Penguin book collecting. Now, I've been covering them on YouTube here for over 6 years, and there's a wealth of content to explore. All my Penguin videos have been grouped into a dedicated playlist. Now, lastly, where to buy old Penguin books. So your local second-hand bookshop, if you've got one near you, is almost certainly going to have some. They may not all be first printings, and they may not all be in the greatest of conditions, but they will have some. Dotted around the UK are some bookshops that tend to have a great vintage Penguin stock. I can recommend the Ironbridge bookshop in, surprise, surprise, Ironbridge. It's packed with Penguins in a dedicated area, and the books are very well priced. When buying online, eBay has to be on your radar. There are plenty of job lots on offer here, but I would advise steering clear of these unless the listing is very detailed with printings and conditions. General job lots are usually common books in low grade and sold for their looks rather than for any sort of collectability. Pinpointing individual titles can be expensive, so smaller job lots might be the way to go. It's not unusual to see a retiring collector offloading their books one by one, and you can usually get a combined postage rate or even collect in person. Sometimes real rarities can be listed and hotly fought over between bidders. Facebook. Not the greatest, to be honest. There is a dedicated group for buying and selling, but you don't see a lot of action here. ABE Books. Also not the greatest, but it can be useful for picking up foreign Penguin books. The aforementioned Penguin First Editions website has dealers listed on its homepage on the right sidebar, and this does change, but most of the main UK dealers are listed on that website. I also have regular Penguin sales videos, and I often buy entire collections, so feel free to drop me an email at julesburt@gmail.com, and I usually have spare books available, and I can advise you on different aspects of Penguin book collecting. If you have got your own collection to sell, once again, drop me an email. I may well be interested. Ultimately, collecting Penguin books can be an incredibly rewarding hobby. You'll have a fantastic looking bookcase, you'll be the envy of your friends, and you'll never be short of something to read, that's for certain. Now, if you've enjoyed this particular video, as I said, I will be looking at different aspects of Penguin's vast history in future dedicated videos down the line. So even within this main series, this is really just a bit of a starter, a bit of a teaser to see if you want to go down this particular rabbit hole. But in the future, if you'd like, I will do dedicated videos pinpointing, say, the books to look out for in the first 100 or the first 500, and books beyond that, which may be a little bit more unusual, but also are quite valuable. We'll definitely be looking at Puffin books in detail, Puffin picture books, Pelican books, the Penguin Classics, the King Penguin series. There are many thousands of books to cover over the coming weeks. So make sure you are subscribed to this brand new series where we look at how to become a better book collector. Now, if you've enjoyed today's video, which I hope you've done, do please give the video a thumbs up. Do please hit the subscribe button if you've not already for regular vintage book content, and I'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.